Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget, millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to RightOnGame.com.
That's RightOnGame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. RightOnGame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 435-9er-21. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4739er, 89er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds AGPT. Gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. And I want to continue to say Happy New Year to everybody. I've got the honor of having Robert Spencer with us. Robert has been on the show many times before, and always like to get to people that we can have some real truths with and not be talking in platitudes. And Robert doesn't do that. He just puts it out there. Robert is also the successful author of The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. So with that, Happy New Year, Robert, and welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Happy New Year, Denise. Thank you. Great to be here.
I talked to you about some other topics, but in the meantime, we have a new event that just sort of happened, and we have this Congresswoman from Michigan who I think her name is Rashida Tlaib.
Tlaib, yes.
I don't think she likes Donald Trump very much, do you?
Not very much. No, she is part of the new Democrat contingent in the House that's determined to impeach, defame, and destroy the president, and they're going to be doing all they can to do that.
All right. I guess it is something that we probably should have expected, that we have. I mean, she's Palestinian. She is a very big supporter and proponent of BDS, which is Boycott, Divest, and Sanction, which is a fairly sizable organization in the United States against Israel. And based on her comments right after she was sworn into Congress, I think she was at a MoveOn.org party after she was sworn in, that she decided that she was going to certainly impeach and they were going to come after Trump, the MF. So yeah. I would argue that almost immediately some of these Republicans ought to demand that she go before an ethics committee. not that the ethics committee has any kind of teeth to it, because there really is never any consequence, but nonetheless, it kind of rings the bell. Is that kind of overstating the problem here, Robert, or no?
No, you're quite right. I mean, the president has not been convicted of any crime. He's not been charged with any crime. There isn't even any indication that he's committed any crime. And so she's convicting him a priori just because she dislikes his political stances. If we start down the road of bringing legal proceedings, impeachment proceedings against presidents because we don't like their political stances, then the American system is over. The idea of opposing parties that are loyal opposition and mutually respectful is gone, and we're a cutthroat third world nation with people scrambling for power by any means, ethical or unethical. This is the road that Rashida Tlaib wants to put us on.
And then we have this other person, I think was it the Cleveland Clinic, that what the Lara Kolob. Yeah. Can you explain to the listeners what this person was all about?
Yeah, she was up until recently a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, as you've noted, and she's a Muslim, and she has an extensive history going back to 2012 of tweeting hatred and vitriol against Jews. And at one point, several years ago, she actually tweeted that that she was going to purposely give the wrong medication to her Jewish patients, which is, of course, a violation of the Hippocratic Oath, should have gotten her removed from the Cleveland Clinic right away, but nobody appeared to notice or didn't care until November, when the Canary Mission, which is a group that's dedicated to exposing anti-Semitism, they wrote a profile of Lara Kolob and highlighted all of her tweets. And then the Cleveland Clinic said that she had been dismissed. That's very good, but you do wonder. I mean, tweets are public things, and why did it take all these years of the Canary Mission to get the Cleveland Clinic to act? Did nobody actually see this beforehand? Nobody called it to attention? I would expect that if the Cleveland Clinic employed a doctor who had tweeted in support of the KKK, it wouldn't have taken 6 years for them to notice.
Well said. Robert, you and maybe a handful of others are those that are out there that are watching these kinds of things. I would say that there's a pattern that's happening here. You really need a busload of people on your team here, because I think much more of this is going on across the United States, right?
Yeah, there's certainly, with the increase in the Muslim population in the United States, there is a sharp increase in anti-Semitism. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit it. But the reality is that anti-Semitism is deeply rooted in Islam. The Quran calls Jews the worst enemies of the Muslims, says they're under the curse of Allah, that they're always scheming against the Muslims, that they are the inveterate enemies of the Muslims. And so there is this anti-Semitism that is considered in Islam to be essentially divinely mandated. And consequently, it's very hard to root out. It's very virulent. And being so deeply rooted in Islam, it goes wherever Muslims go, which means that you end up with people like Lara Kolob, and there are more and more of them in the United States.
You're going to have to refresh my memory, and I may be blindsiding you with this question, Robert, but Palestinians actually have a diplomatic office in Washington, D.C., and it seemed, or the Palestinian Authority, it seems to me that months ago, the Trump administration asked it to be removed, or there was some kind of action against that diplomatic office. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know what the present status is, but certainly, yes, the Trump administration announced that it was going to close the D.C. office of the Palestinian Mission. The Trump administration has been very clear that the Palestinians don't have any interest in pursuing genuine peace negotiations with the Israelis, and consequently, the Trump administration is holding them to account. This is the first time they've ever been held to account for not wanting to pursue peace with Israel. And so actually I'm just looking as I'm sitting here and talking to you, and I see that it was indeed shut in mid-September.
Okay. All right. So I don't have any kind of memory disease here quite yet. So as a consequence, our little a new junior congresswoman here from Michigan's Rashida, that would yet be another flag on her, that I don't know what, I mean, can there be some kind of a consequence? Can there be some kind of sanction against her? I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, we have a situation that's going to brew here, I would say, in a big way. Correct?
Well, look, you have this congresswoman who is a member of the United States House of Representatives, who, when she was elected at her victory party, actually wrapped herself in a Palestinian flag that her mother handed her. Now, imagine if you had a Republican congressman who was elected and then wrapped himself in a Russian flag or a French flag or a German flag or any flag on earth. There would have been a huge outcry and questions about whether this congressman was really loyal to the United States. But, excuse me, when it comes to Rashida Tlaib, she's a reliable leftist, and so the leftist establishment, which controls the Democrat Party, controls the establishment media, and so on, they're not going to hold her to account or take any particular notice of this. This is just a matter of course. They all support the Palestinian Jihad, and they don't mind if she does.
This one's going to be a big one to watch, I would say. Has anybody ever looked at her campaign money on where it came from in order for her
Here
to...
again, the people that have the responsibility to hold her to account for such matters are on her side, and so she's not being held to account and is unlikely to be unless there were not only a Republican Congress again, but a Republican Congress that was not a Paul Ryan Republican establishment Congress, but a Congress that was really interested in justice and in holding everyone responsible to the same laws. Only in that kind of circumstance will Rashida Tlaib ever be investigated.
You need a bigger army. The longer you and I talk, the bigger it needs to be. You know, I'm hearing a lot of those lawmakers now on the left that are talking about all this social justice agenda here in the United States. And when it comes to any kind of social justice internationally, it's usually where our tax dollars need to be funding abortion. But on the other hand, that those same social justice warriors are not talking about the relationships that we have with what I would call essentially allied countries, being Britain or Belgium, and yet they continue to have intermittent terror attacks and gang rapes and whatnot, but we don't hear any of these social justice warriors speaking to any of that, do we?
Well, no, there's a massive alliance between leftists and the jihad force. Apparently, the left is so set against America and so hates America and Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, that they see the jihadis and they see a force that has been set against the West for 1,400 years, and they see in that an ally. This is somebody they can work with because they both hate the same things.
So I know that you publish a lot of these things. I imagine that your day is filled with getting up every morning and kind of looking at global headlines. And you report these things. What is generally the response of your work?
Well, of course, it's sharply divided, just like pretty much everything else in the United States today. There are some people who are very grateful and complimentary, and others who say that this is all racist and bigoted. Now, the idea that it's racist and bigoted to oppose jihad mass murder and the Sharia oppression of women and other groups is, I think, ridiculous on its face. But the left essentially takes it for granted that that's the case. And is very much against any honest reporting of the nature and the magnitude of the jihad threat.
So I'm going to take it on a bigger scale. We have this issue going on in the Middle East where I would argue we are still having persecutions against Christians and the Yazidis and even the Kurds. And yet we don't hear anybody on the left or the social justice warriors wanting to at least have a discussion about what is happening and has happened in Iraq and Syria, Lebanon. Isn't it time for some other kind of policy stance on those Christian and or non-Islamic populations that are still under major persecutions?
Sure. I've been calling for years for a massive revision of our foreign policy stances to take into account the realities of the global jihad. This has not been forthcoming. President Trump actually is the closest to doing this in cutting off funding to Pakistan and to the Palestinian Authority for not being honest in pursuing peace, and that's all to the good. There needs to be much more of that. There needs to be a massive reevaluation of whether countries such as Pakistan and Turkey are even allies of the United States at all in any reliable way. Now, as far as the persecution of Christians goes, the Trump administration has actually quite recently specifically begun initiatives to aid the Christian and Yazidi victims of the Islamic State. And that is very good development to see because the Obama administration favored Muslims who were coming into the United States from the countries where Christians were being persecuted, even at the expense of the victims themselves. And so the Trump administration is righting a great wrong, and that's all to the good.
Now, interestingly enough, the United States had moved the embassy in Israel, and I think another South American country, was it Ecuador? Maybe not Ecuador, that has said that they would move theirs as well.
Several countries have said so. I don't have a list right in front of me. I know that Australia has recently said so, but they hedged it a bit, saying they would move it after there was a peace accord between Israel and the Palestinians, which means they're never going to move it.
A country that we don't hear much of that seemed, Robert, to be at the heart of all of this, what was it, the Arab Spring, was Egypt. And all of a sudden we don't hear about Egypt anymore, do we? Is it because it's moderated some, or are there some other issues there that you're aware of when you travel the headlines?
In Egypt, you had the Muslim Brotherhood regime in 2012. Then that regime was so repressive and so cruel to its own people that there were massive uprisings in 2013, and it was removed from power. And since then, there's been essentially a military regime. It's not strictly military rule because the general who took over, El-Sisi, has been ruling as a civilian, but he has strongly moved against the Muslim Brotherhood and has tried to keep a lid on it. At the same time, however, not to the degree that he has been able to prevent the Brotherhood from persecuting the Christians. The Brotherhood blames Christians for its loss of power in Egypt and frequently targets them. The Sisi administration has done nothing to stop that.
It wasn't, I think, but early last year where the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, said that they had essentially terror cases or plots or people that they were investigating virtually in every state. And yet that's fallen off the headlines. And I happened to see a piece a couple of days ago where in Britain, that they've got 700 open cases. So we are still in the throes of major threats, and yet we have to talk about all these other kind of stupid things and we're not advancing this debate, are we?
Oh, no, certainly not. There's still massive denial, willful ignorance in regard to it. The Obama administration was committed as a matter of policy to ignoring and denying that there was a jihad threat at all. You had instead this countering violent extremism program, which is essentially an elaborate exercise in deflecting attention away from the reality of the jihad threat. The Trump administration has instituted a new counterterror policy that does speak about a threat from what they call radical Islamist extremism, which is a bit euphemistic for the fact that it's mainstream Islam that actually teaches jihad warfare against unbelievers. But it is an improvement over the Obama administration. At the same time, the establishment media and the Democrat Party establishment are still completely ignoring the threat and ascribing it all to Islamophobia as if it were bigotry against Muslims that took down the Twin Towers and has been responsible for all the other jihad attacks since then.
How many of your books, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to Islamic State, have you been able to autograph for people that are so interested in it?
I don't know. I don't keep track of how many I autographed. I have autographed quite a few. There's been, I'm happy to say, there's quite a lot of interest in this book, more than expected. It's now in its fourth printing, and the publisher did not expect it. Ran out, as a matter of fact, the first week because the publisher didn't expect the demand to be so high. So
Excellent.
That's all been great.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, certainly, on the book. I think I saw you in the early September in Washington D.C., and it had just come out then. You haven't had much critical response to it, have you?
Well, nowadays everything is so polarized, and
Okay.
the New York Times and the New York Review of Books, things like that, they just don't review books that don't fit their agenda. But I've gotten some wonderful reviews from places like Newsmax and American Thinker and so on.
Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please go visit Robert's website, jihadwatch.org. He's, again, one of a very small team that is just watching the headlines globally and on where we are with this constant condition and keeping us abreast of all of this. Mr. Robert Spencer, thanks so much for being on the Denise Simon Experience. And for sure, again, happy travels and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Denise. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. More coming your way, so stay with me.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. A previous guest, Ira Melhman, who is with the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and quite the I guess, boundless go-to person when it comes to immigration reform, has been kind enough to join us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Thank you very much, Ira.
Thank you.
Hey, there's one component here that's been bugging me, and I need your help and to explain it to the listeners. Every voting district across the United States has about 800 to a little over 800,000 voters in it. And
yeah, more or less.
More or less. And what we have come to see is that often those lines get redrawn for various and sundry reasons, least of which is you got to keep in that number in and around 800,000. But I would argue that people are not paying too much attention to the fact that now you've got these voting enclaves where the non-citizens are getting representation in Washington, D.C. in Congress.
Well, that's correct. The congressional districts are drawn based on just raw population numbers without regard to people's citizenship. And, it is perfectly fair to count people in the census who are not citizens, even people who are in the country illegally. The question is, should those numbers that are inflated by the number of non-citizens, and particularly illegal aliens who are, shouldn't even be in the country, should they be granted political representation? You have to remember, this is a zero-sum game. There are 435 seats in the House of Representatives. It does not expand. So each 10 years, some states gain political representation in Congress. Other states lose representation in Congress based on their populations. And, if you look at states like California, the numbers are vastly inflated by the number of illegal aliens living there. So that means California winds up with additional seats in Congress at the expense of other states. And even more importantly, it also determines how federal funds are distributed. So the presence of large numbers of people who are in the country illegally
can affect how federal dollars go, to things that are needed around the country. And again, it becomes a zero-sum game. California winds up with more of the pie, whereas other states that have a lot fewer people living there illegally wind up with less. So these are things that need to be addressed. I mean, it's one thing to count people. We should know who's in the country, how many people are in the country. There are a lot of good reasons for that. The question is, should we be granting congressional representation and also allocating scarce federal dollars based on the presence of people who shouldn't be here in the first place?
Okay, so thank you for explaining that. I knew that, and you put it in a lot of perspective, certainly for the listeners. This is a condition, a paradigm that nobody really has a discussion about. Now, it wasn't all too long ago that California was dead broke. I mean, so broke that they were writing IOUs to government employees. Because of the non-citizens and because of federal dollars going into those voting districts, did that in part, this may be really conflating the issue, Ira, but did that in part help California with their financial balance sheet?
Well, certainly to some extent. And also, we've had a lot of differences with Jerry Brown over the years when it comes to immigration policy, but he was a very astute financial manager, and you got to give him credit for that. But look, I mean, based on just sort of the general state of the economy, states, sometimes have windfalls. Other times they're scraping around for every dollar. So, the fact that California is, flush with cash right now doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be true next year or 5 years from now. And at the same time, while California may be getting more than its fair share of federal dollars because it has a large population of illegal aliens, there are costs associated with that. California has to pay, something in the order of about $25 billion a year to provide basic services, education, healthcare, those sorts of things for illegal aliens and their dependents. And look, these are self-induced problems. California keeps passing laws that say to people, we don't care what your immigration status is, come here, we'll give you whatever you want. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. Right now, California seems to be doing relatively well. But as I said, things change.
And so that's going to lead us over to the sanctuary part of the issue. The Justice Department has put some pressure on withholding monies going into sanctuary cities and sanctuary states because of what it ends. I mean, I don't know that there's any kind of oversight on how those monies are spent. Is this going to advance at all, or are we just going to be sitting here in the Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit and the whatever circuit?
Well, it's going to advance, but, as you know, the wheels of justice turn rather slowly, and everything gets litigated these days. So, it's going to take some time. But, the Congress ultimately has the responsibility for appropriating money, but the executive branch does have control over certain funds that Congress has authorized them to distribute based on, their own set of conditions. Mm-hmm. So, there seems to be no legal reason other than some activist judges that is preventing, the federal government from doing this at this point. But again, everything is going to be litigated. Everything's going to take time. It's just the way the process goes.
I would argue that we had a chance to have a real congressional hearing, either in the House side or the Senate side, on the true costs of aliens and non-citizens in the United States. Now that we've changed the balance of power in the House, we probably won't have that, but we have the opportunity to do it in the Senate. Is that a prudent thing to do here at this point so we can really put some numbers, financial numbers and people numbers on the record to understand what all this is really costing the U.S. taxpayer? Absolutely. The American taxpayers have a right to know how their dollars are being spent.
what certain things that the federal government does or even state and local government do cost them, that is an open and transparent democracy, and we ought to have it. And you're right, the Republican-led Congress over the past 2 years didn't really do these things. Now you're going to have divided control of Congress. We're probably going to see more gridlock, but it doesn't change the need for the American people to understand what impact our immigration policies are having on them, what impact our failure to enforce immigration laws are having on them. And again, it's not just that the money is being spent on people in the country illegally, but it also means that in many cases money is not being spent for other needs in this country. And, even in these relatively good economic times, there are still a lot of programs that people rely on that are underfunded. And, people pay a price for this. So we're making choices here. If we had unlimited resources, we wouldn't have to have people governing the country or anything like that. We'd just do whatever everybody wants. But that's not the reality of the world we live in. And so we have to recognize that if you are going to be diverting funds to pay for the needs of people who are in the country illegally, that somebody else is paying a price for that because his or her program that might be needed to get by isn't being funded the way it should.
We're almost having a hearing right here, aren't we, Ira? Let's talk about, let me kind of go back to California, which I argue is also happening in Illinois, New York and whatnot. But in the case of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her win for a congressional seat, we seem to have illegals, especially in California, that have been granted voting privileges for local, referendums or, local ballot issues, I would say. And the juries, when courts need requests for jurors, those inventories of people that they can pull from come from the voter rolls. Now, some have been, I noticed some have gotten requests for jury duty and they say, I can't do it because I'm not a U.S. citizen. Okay, cool. But we don't know what that number is. And so I guess where I'm going with this, in the case of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, did she kind of get voted in and from illegal voting, and then in the case of jurors, do we have non-citizens being on jury duty?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, the fact is, sometimes they draw them from Department of Motor Vehicle records. There's a variety of sources that they use to create the juror pools. But certainly, as you point out, there are a few jurisdictions that have said that, you don't have to be a citizen to vote in local elections. And that's an important issue. It's not a big issue yet. It's not extensive, but it's certainly something that bears watching. But, the other thing to remember is that, the Democrats took control of Congress not because people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got elected. She just replaced another Democrat that she beat in the primary. What Nancy Pelosi ought to be looking at are the districts that swung from Republican to Democrat in the last election as being kind of indicative of where the public is right now. In those districts, which, kind of purple districts, they can go either way, as we saw in the last election, the vast majority of people want immigration enforcement. They want sound immigration policies. And, if Nancy Pelosi is thinking about being Speaker again come 2021, she ought to pay attention to what voters in those swing districts want, much more so than in the 14th District of New York. That's kind of an anomaly. And, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now has a platform, but she is not really representative of where most voters are outside of her district. The people who really are representative of kind of the mainstream of American thinking, those are representatives who were elected in districts that, have a kind of a centrist point of view where the people could go either way in an election.
Is there? I mean, we heard that, the Gang of Eight when the Senate did the immigration reform and passed the Senate, and of course then it fell on the floor in the House. Okay, now we are where we are, and we keep hearing about we need comprehensive immigration reform. Has either side proposed, or any outside organizations like FAIR proposed any kind of legislation that can at least be some basis from which to work from? Because I don't see the Democrats offering anything. We just say that they're not going to fund the wall. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess comprehensive immigration reform, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder, and that's been the problem all along. First we have to define what it is that we expect our immigration policies to achieve for us. And in that respect, immigration policy is probably different from every policy that you can think of. Pretty much every policy that we deal with, you could define the public interest or national interest purpose in one sentence. If we were having a discussion about defense policy, we would all agree that the purpose of our defense policy is to protect the security of the United States and our interests around the world. And whether, you're on the far left or the far right, we'd probably all agree that that's the objective, how to achieve that objective, defining exactly what the priorities ought to be. That's the area of contention. When it comes to immigration policy, we have never even defined what it is that we're hoping to achieve. We admit 1 million people or so every year, another 500,000 or so show up illegally, and we don't have the vaguest clue of what it is that we're trying to achieve through this. So the first thing we need to do as a nation is to sit down and kind of figure out what it is we want to achieve. That's, at that point you can then start to lay out a roadmap for how to get there. But our view is that it ought to begin from the premise that the immigration policy, like every other public policy, is there to serve and protect the interests of the American people. The American people are the primary constituency for U.S. immigration policy. There are people outside the country who have interests, who are stakeholders, but it starts from, what impact is this having on the American people? Is it having a positive impact? Are we serving the greater good? Things like protecting our borders, ensuring that people can't come to the United States illegally and get jobs. These are things that should be relatively easy for Congress to pass if they had any concern for the public interest. But, as we see time and again, what goes on in Washington is very often completely divorced in many respects, not just on this policy, from the interests and concerns of the people back home.
I would argue, and help me with this, because I think maybe you and I even discussed this back during the FAIR Hold Their Feet to the Fire event in D.C. several months ago, and that is, if we didn't have so many countries that are in a tailspin, that are failing governments, Ecuador, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, China, so many things, then we wouldn't have an immigration issue. I mean, we wouldn't have the volume that we have today. So a lot of this is kind of residual on where we have been over the last, 10 or 15 years that have caused the volume of immigration crisis that we're in today. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the rash of failed states around the world is certainly having an impact. You see it not just here; you see it, with the migration crisis in Europe.
Syria, yeah.
Look, I mean, those are real problems. There's always been two factors when it comes to migration. It's the push factors, the conditions in the home countries, and the pull factors, the things that are offered to people once they get to the United States or to a Western European nation. We obviously have far more control over the pull factors than we do over the push factors. But what you're kind of talking about here is that we have to recognize that this is a multifaceted issue and multifaceted problem. Obviously we cannot solve every other country's problems for them, but we can, be helpful in some cases. We can use, diplomatic pressure, we can use economic pressure to get some of these governments to reform themselves. If you have a government that is just utterly neglecting the basic needs and concerns of their own citizens, we should treat those sorts of governments differently than we treat governments that respect the interests of their citizens. So there are a lot of things that we can do, but we can't just treat this as a humanitarian crisis because in that case we're just treating symptoms. We need to start addressing some of the problems at their core. Again, we can't solve their problems for them, but we can certainly bring to bear whatever pressure we can to get them to address them. Because right now their attitude is, well, if you're not happy here, go. There's the border. There's the United States. There's Western Europe. There's Australia. Go be their problem.
Yeah, we don't see a whole bunch of people that have decided that they're going to bail out and they're going to move to Venezuela or they're going to move to Russia or they're going to move to China. I mean, they don't seem to have these issues. It is the westernized countries, if you will, that there is an entitlement, financial entitlement attraction that is exacerbating the problem. So if we have this hearing in the Senate, which I think you need to lead, by the way, I would say that panel would have to include not just immigration type people. It's got to include diplomats. It's got to include Treasury. It's got, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we've got a lot of moving parts here, don't we?
Yeah. Look, I mean, if you look at the current migration crisis coming from Central America, the people are coming because they're saying that, the economy has just completely tanked, that the government isn't protecting people. Sometimes it's from abusive spouses or just from generalized gang violence. We have to recognize that these are failed states and that the people who are running these countries are not doing what they are supposed to be doing. And we have to start treating them in some sense as rogue states, or at least rogue governments, and using whatever pressures we can. Diplomatic, there's also the international economic organizations, the IMF, the World Bank. There are things that we can do that will make the folks who are supposedly running these countries understand that they simply cannot neglect the most basic concerns of their citizens and expect everybody else to deal with them, and then expect to be treated like a legitimate government. There has to be a price to pay for this just utter failure.
We just went through a lot of we want regime change in Iran. Prior to that, we said Assad must go in Syria, but nobody is saying that Maduro needs to go in Venezuela. President Xi is now the premier or president of China in perpetuity. So we've kind of abandoned some of these rogue leaders, the thought of a regime change. How did we get here?
Well, look, I mean, we can't affect regime change in these countries. Only the people, the citizens of those countries can do that. Mm-hmm. And, ultimately it is up to the people of every nation to ensure that their governments are responsive. And look, I mean, that's much easier said than done. But if you look around the world and look at the kind of changes that have occurred, it is because they came from within, because there were leaders who stood up. You had Lech Wałęsa in Poland who challenged the regime. You had in South Africa Nelson Mandela, who sat in prison for 27 years. You had Gandhi, who resisted colonial rule. That's when change happens, and it doesn't come cheaply. Somebody has to pay a price, and it's very easy for us to sit here and tell other people that's what they have to do. But if you look at the reality, nothing changes until people within those countries decide, it's enough. We're not going to take these governments that are just ignoring us, looting the treasury. We are going to change things ourselves.
And so that's kind of the curious thing because, for instance, Mexico, we've got so many people here from Mexico that are carrying the Mexican flag. Well, they've come here, they've learned what we're about. I'm stunned that there's a lack of resolute loyalty to say, okay, we're going to go back to Mexico and we're going to help Mexico fix some of these, or Guatemala or Honduras. And so we've really got, I would say, false loyalties or, kind of misguided agendas here. Would that be right?
Yeah, look, I mean, human beings are always going to take the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to speak truth to power when the power is relatively benign, where you have, First Amendment or, other laws that protect, from people from speaking out. In some of these countries, it is dangerous to speak out, and people pay a price. And, there's no getting around that. And as I said, it's easy for us to sit here and tell people that, you have to go risk your life to change things in the country you came from. But the reality is that things are never going to change until people do that.
Wow. It just became a whole lot more daunting than shutting the government down and funding the border wall, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this again, we're treating the symptoms, and it is absolutely necessary. As we've seen, walls can be very, very effective. If you look at what happened with the caravan that came up from Central America over the past few months, they headed to the border near San Diego, where, thanks to President Bill Clinton, there actually is a wall. And, for the most part, they have not been able to get into the United States illegally. So these things are effective. We put locks on doors and windows. It's great to have technology to augment them. But, if I had to choose between having a lock on my door or a sensor on my door, I'd choose the lock. So these are things that we need to do in the short term to deal with some of the symptoms. But the symptoms are, symptomatic of a problem, of the larger problem. And those things need to be addressed as well. So we have to address this on many layers, not just on one layer.
Ladies and gentlemen, please go visit FAIR.org, Federation for American Immigration Reform.
FairUS.org. FairUS.org.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for that correction. That's exactly right. Federation for American Immigration Reform. Ira, you've been great to kind of help us put the things in context and in perspective. I would say that it's a much bigger thing than shutting down the government and just funding a border wall. We've covered an awful lot of material here today, and you've been great in explaining this. Don't be surprised if I tap you on the shoulder once again to come back and say, where are we now? But work on that scheduled hearing in the Senate side, will you, sir?
Yeah, I'll get right on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ira Melhman. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got more coming your way, so stay with us.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic Radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.
Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to rightongame.com.
That's rightongame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
Rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. Rightongame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We're certainly going to continue the discussion on immigration. So I've got the distinct honor of having Hans von Spakovsky with us, who is the senior legal fellow at Heritage's Mee Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. And from a legal component, we're going to have a little chat here. So thank you, Mr. Hans, for joining us.
Denise, thanks for having me on.
Okay. I might be one of the few people that you talk to that's not getting caught up in this whole government shutdown funding the border wall thing. You know, the Democrats say we want, border security. The Trump White House is saying we want a border wall. And I would argue even if he got his $5.8 billion, we're not going to get a border wall in the next year, right?
Well, it depends on how fast you can get contractors going on it. I don't think you can get security without increasing the physical barriers, whether you want to call it a wall or a fence or whatever, in the more open areas of the southern borders where it's easy to just walk a little distance
across
if you're in the U.S. And that's got to change. I mean, look, if walls weren't effective, why is there one around the White House?
Agreed. I agree with you there. But I would say that I think the bigger issue here is the failure on both parties to advance, I would think, really like a 40-year-old discussion on what we want and what we have to have and what we cannot have in immigration policy, right?
Well, except what I would say about that is don't forget that within the past year there were several bills introduced by members of Congress in the House by Republicans that were actually comprehensive bills that did all kinds of things, like not only provide money for a more secure border, but, for example, there was a bill that would have changed chain migration that would have made E-Verify mandatory, that would have taken a whole series of steps that are needed to reform our immigration reform system. And don't forget, the president offered a huge compromise to the Democrats. One I actually didn't agree with. Remember, he offered them, he said, look, I'll agree to provide amnesty to over 2 million illegal aliens who are currently in the country if you'll give me these other things like funding for the wall. The Democrats said no. So he offered a gigantic compromise, but the Democrats didn't sign on to it.
And so we are where we are today. So we're in the throes of, I would argue, the art of the deal. So, Mr. Hans, we've got visa overstays. You mentioned chain migration. We got quotas, and we got birthright citizenships. Any other items that I think that this Trump White House needs to be throwing on the table in these talks between Schumer and Pelosi?
Well, there's a whole series of things, but you've certainly pointed out the main issues. Yes.
So it really comes down to we're stuck in the mud because the Senate can introduce something, but it's obvious from where we are with the Pelosi speakership that nothing's going to get through the House. So are we just stuck in the mud here, sir?
I think we are now. We should all realize that what they're calling the so-called government shutdown isn't really a government shutdown. What I think gets lost in the news is that 3/4 of the government is funded. Congress last fall passed several mini appropriation bills that have funded 3/4 of the federal government through fiscal year 2019. So for the next year, the argument that they're getting into is over the last quarter of that funding, which includes funding for the Department of Homeland Security. So while people keep talking about a government shutdown, actually, there's only a very partial government shutdown. Most of the government is open, running, and funded. And even as the Department of Homeland Security, one of the few agencies that hasn't had a funding bill yet signed for it, the Border Patrol and all law enforcement, they keep operating. And I don't know if you saw this, Denise, but the president just had a news conference in which he had members of the Border Patrol there.
Yes.
Who said, look, yeah, we're not getting paid, but we think this is so important that we're actually supporting the president of this. So the Border Patrol, the people who are actually down there every day.
In the trenches.
In the trenches, trying to prevent illegal aliens from crossing the borders, they believe that this wall funding is necessary for them to do their job.
Same goes with Coast Guard, too. Coast Guard, I think, is under Department of Homeland Security, too, so they're not getting paid?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Everybody is talking about keeping America safe. Great. We like that. But we've got sanctuary cities and we've got sanctuary states here. And because of the recent tragedy of Sheriff's Officer Singh and his death, the one word that seems to be missing in all of this to me is public safety. And I'm really rather stunned that the Department of Justice or other legal entities out there are not proposing some kind of real sanctions or consequence to the state of California and or wherever these other enclaves are over the matter of public safety. Is there a cure for that, Hans?
Well, except remember, Denise, Jeff Sessions actually did try to do something about this. Remember, he tried to cut off the ability of cities and states from around the country to apply for and get the law enforcement grants that the Justice Department hands out every year. It's a couple $2 billion worth of money. He tried to put in rules saying that if you are a sanctuary city, you can't apply for and you can't get any of this grant money. And he's been thwarted, I think improperly so, in the courts by liberal judges who said, oh, you can't do that. What that means is that unless those decisions get overturned, the only way that those kind of cities are going to get sanctioned is if Congress passes a statute giving the Justice Department and other parts of the federal government the ability to cut off funding to them, because otherwise you've got all these liberal judges who are going to prevent it from happening.
Well, when you apply for these grants from the federal government,
right,
those monies in that application have some stipulations or some conditions on how they're to be spent, behavior-wise, correct?
That they do, and in fact, that's why I think the court decisions are wrong. Those applications specifically say that you, the applicant, the city of Chicago, for example, you are certifying that you are in full compliance with all federal laws. I think when they obstruct federal immigration enforcement, they're not in compliance with federal laws. And in fact, I think the Justice Department, I think Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, was correct in saying we can deny you funding. I think these judges, many of them are very liberal appointees, people who were nominated by Barack Obama. I think they're frankly not following the rule of law, and that's why they're ruling against the administration.
And so, can there be a financial penalty for not being in compliance, not just not being able to apply for these grants, but because they were in violation of those stipulations? Is that kind of another lane by which legally that those funds can be withheld?
Only if those cases, those court orders, are slowly working their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. I'm hoping what happens is that when these cases get to the U.S. Supreme Court, the Supreme Court is going to overrule all these lower court judges and say, no, the Justice Department has the ability to deny them funding. The only alternative to that is to have Congress pass a statute that specifically cuts off funding to sanctuary cities. And as you and I have just discussed, with the Democrats controlling the House and the Republicans controlling the Senate, there's no way that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats would ever allow a bill like that to get through the House.
Let me circle back to overstays and chain migration and quotas,
Sure.
For instance. Is there a avenue for an executive order to address those three items, overstays and chain migration and quotas? I would argue that we can suspend quotas and take them to zero immediately over national security and public safety. But I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Holmes, you are.
I don't believe that the chain migration issue can be changed without a statute. And we should make very clear what we're talking about. No one is proposing that if you're an immigrant to this country, that you shouldn't be able to also bring in your spouse and your minor kids. But the problem that we have today is that, and the reason it's called chain migration is that under our rules, not only can you bring those folks in, you can automatically bring in your parents. You can bring in all of your adult siblings, all of your adult children. And then once they are in and citizens, they can bring all of their adult brothers and sisters, siblings in, spouses, etc. So that's why it's called chain migration. It's this never-ending expansion from one immigrant coming in. That's what needs to be changed. We're one of the few countries that allows that. We're also one of the few countries that allows birthright citizenship. That's something that I believe can be changed by an executive order. And look, visa overstays, that doesn't require any kind of statute by Congress. Visa overstays just requires us having a
Enforcement.
Good enforcement and a system in place that allows DHS to basically detect when someone who is here legally has overstayed their visa and needs to be picked up and sent out of the country.
So, let's say tomorrow afternoon, you yourself, Mr. Hans, have a session with Pelosi and Schumer. What do you want to say to them?
I see you want me to say what I would tell them they ought to do, because I don't think they're going to do anything that I tell them. Well, here's what I would do going through a list. I would make the E-Verify system mandatory. That would require all employers across the country, when they're hiring someone, to check with the federal government to be sure that they are either a U.S. citizen, therefore entitled to work, or if they're an alien, they're in the country legally and have permission to work. That ought to be mandatory. Chain migration needs to be changed and restricted to just the immediate nuclear family, as I've described. I think for legal immigration, when we allow immigrants to come in, we should ensure one of two things: either that they've got a job offer inside the United States, and if they don't, that they have family here who will sponsor them and sign a legal document saying they take full financial responsibility for those individuals. That's one of the only things we can do to prevent, even bigger increases in our welfare system with immigrants coming here who are too poorly educated, don't have the experience needed to, be productive members of our society. I mean, those are just a few of the things that need to be done. And like I said, ending birthright citizenship, that's also an important factor in this.
You almost, when you talked about family members and having a job and money in their pocket, you're taking us back in time to where those were stipulations at Ellis Island, right?
That is exactly right. We used to have these kind of requirements. Other countries today have them. We got rid of most of them in the mid-1960s, during the time of hippies and anti-Vietnam War protests. You would think that folks today would realize that perhaps some of the policy decisions that were made back then may not have been a good idea, and that we might want to revisit them.
And so what needs to be, you just had the conversation then with Schumer and Pelosi. Thank you for that. If you were to give a quick opening argument in a let's say a Senate committee hearing, what would be your opening argument on what some cures are?
One, that you are going to spoil and damage the support that Americans have always had for legal immigration in this country if you do not do something to stop, prevent, and deter illegal immigration.
Well said. I like that one.
And second of all, from an economic standpoint, yes, we want legal immigrants coming into this country. They've been a boon to our economy now for a long time. But illegal immigration is not a boon to our economy, particularly because the average educational achievement level of illegal aliens in this country these days is the 10th grade. Many of them coming in not speaking English. They end up and are going to end up being a drain on our economy, on our welfare system. And from an economic standpoint, what we want coming into this country are the best and the brightest. And we don't get that with our current legal immigration system, and we're certainly not getting that with our illegal alien population.
And I would say in some cases, too, that these countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, China, Venezuela, they're having a labor drain, too, are they not?
Well, they are, certainly. And Mexico, for example, has so many of its citizens coming to the United States. And in fact, that makes it, frankly, easier for those governments to not take on the kind of hard chores they need to reform their governments and their economic systems. Why? Well, look, the second biggest source of income in Mexico are remittances sent back to Mexico from Mexican citizens who are in the United States, many of them illegally so. Well, that makes it much easier for the Mexican government to say, reform? Why should we do any reforms that improve our economy or anything else? Because we've got all this money coming in from the United States.
Unless we send them $10 billion in support.
Yeah, I'm sure they would like that, but that shows part of the problem there.
Well, we've covered a lot of material here, Mr. Hans von Spakovsky, who is the Senior Legal Fellow at Heritage's Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. And I'm glad you brought up, Hans, the E-Verify, because in all of this discussion in, border funding and all this other, that's yet another one that has been dropped on the floor is E-Verify.
That's right.
So there's a lot of moving parts here. But we need to have a Senate hearing. We won't have one in the House, correct?
Well, we may have one in the House, but a House committee is you know what's going to happen there. It's going to be all about how we're so mean and cruel because we want to actually secure our borders.
Yeah, and because of airplanes, I would argue that any airport that takes an international flight is also a border state. So, but thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Hans von Spakovsky. And we appreciate your expertise in this and putting some legal light on all of this. I still think that there are some regulations. I mean, the Obama administration was pen happy when it came to regulations. I think there are some that we can apply here from the Trump White House. I hope some of your recommendations are getting through to some of those advisors in the White House. But Mr. Hans, thanks so much for joining us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Sure, thanks for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons, too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us on the Denise Simon Experience. We're going to end the show here with Christal Swasey. Christal is an advisory board member for USPIE. That's United States Parents Involved in Education. They reach out to me a lot, and I reach out to them a lot because they're just doing remarkable work when it comes to one of our agencies that just doesn't get a lot of attention, and that's the Department of Education. We've got an interesting phenomenon here, and I'm real glad April and Christal brought it to my attention, and that's HR 4174, which apparently is passed and it's on its way or sitting on President Trump's desk for signature. So thank you, Christal, for joining us. Now, define for us what HR 4174 is.
The name of it is the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking, or they call it FEPA. And I've been studying the bill for 2 years, even before it was a bill, because the Commission for Evidence-Based Policymaking was a commission put together by Obama and Paul Ryan and Patty Murray. They've been talking very openly about their goals, and most people don't care to watch it or listen to it, YouTube it or whatever, because it's really boring. But I want to because I'm very concerned about privacy rights. You know, I am very concerned. And sure enough, from the beginning, they've wanted to create what they call the Federal Clearinghouse of Data. They want all agencies, whether they're federal agencies, state agencies, or even businesses, they want everyone to share data because they believe that this will make research so much easier, which it will, and it will make the world a better place because they don't prioritize privacy as a basic principle of liberty the way that I do. And so I decided I wish I'd done this many months ago, but I have a life and I do take time off from reading bills. Anyway, in the meantime, the bill passed both houses of Congress, and I just found out days ago that it was sitting on Trump's desk. I had no idea. So I read the latest, it's 30 pages long now, and I did the verbal algebra that you have to do, which is they say this word means this according to this definition in section 3561. So then you have to go to 3561, get the new definition and plug it in like an algebra problem so that you understand what they're actually saying every time they say the word, for example, agent or evidence or non-statistical data, things like that. So I did that work and I studied this bill, and I absolutely understand now what they're trying to do. They're trying to make us believe that they're protecting privacy while they are opening up the floodgates for data to be flowing from every single agency into this new system, which is housed in 3 agencies. It's Department of Labor Department, the Census Bureau, and I forgot what the third one was.
Office of Management and Budget.
So the three agencies that are going to be the receptacles of all this data, and then supposedly all the agencies can share data with each other, and there's a presumption of access that anybody can apply to have this data, but we all know how that goes. This is the deep state we're talking about. In fact, this bill empowers the deep state because you are not allowed to have an elected representative be the head of any of these data agencies. It has to be someone, in this bill, it says it has to be someone with a senior level employee of that agency. So other people can be on the little councils, but the person in charge has to be an appointee, cannot be elected, and has to have been in the bureaucracy system for a long time, because they know those are the kind of people who think the way that they think. So the bottom line for me is, if you don't see the shall is the word you're looking for in a bill. Shall means we're going to enforce this and you'll be punished if you don't do this. There's so many shalls, I think 121 shalls in a 30-page document saying you will be sharing data and this is how you will be sharing it. But there's not a single shall saying you will be protecting privacy and this is how you'll be protecting it. So they use the word confidentiality and they use the word privacy, but it's in completely different ways than would be actually truly protective. So it angers me. It makes me sick to my stomach to see this happening. For example, I'll just read you one little tiny thing from the bill that I think explains so much about what they're doing. And what I'm going to read you is actually a loophole that they put in for one agency. This agency, called the Energy Information Administration, gets special treatment. This is on page 19 of HR 4174. Page 19 says, data or information acquired by the Energy Information Administration under a pledge of confidentiality and designated by the agency to be used for exclusively statistical purposes shall not be disclosed in identifiable form for non-statistical purposes. So basically what that is, to put it in normal language, any information that they have shared under a pledge of confidentiality is not going to be disclosed in identifiable form. And non-statistical purposes means they can turn it over to law enforcement. So for them, you can't take their data, turn it into identifiable data, and give it to the FBI or the police or somebody like that. In other words, for everybody else, that's okay. That's something that you can do. And so I've been tweeting so much in the past few days, but I've been tweeting back and forth with one of the leaders of the CEP movement, Nick R. Hart is his name. And I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he is totally defending this bill without looking at the language of the bill. He defends it by saying the privacy experts have looked at it. He defends it by saying all kinds of things, but he doesn't ever quote the bill itself, which I think is very telling because the bill is not defensible. If you look at the language, it's absolutely not defensible. And I'm begging President Trump and all those around him to take a second look. I beg my own local legislators to take a second look. I don't understand why so many of the good guys voted for this bill. I'm believing that they just simply didn't do the verbal algebra required by looking at the definitions and plugging them in. Because if you read it, there is a lot of lip service to privacy. I'll give them that, a ton of lip service. But none of it's enforceable. It's just all loosey-goosey, and they can get away with anything. In fact, if somebody breaks the law, if somebody, not breaks the law, but if an agent were to disclose personally identifiable information, then they have a very wide punishment. It's either nothing, or it's 5 years in jail, or it's $250,000, or it's both the fine and the jail. But it can also be nothing at all. And I think that's very telling. They can let somebody get a slap on the hand and give away or sell data and not get punished at all if it's someone that they want to treat that way, or they can give them a big punishment if they want to. But on the other hand, if an agency or an individual who is required under this bill to submit a whole bunch of data, if they falsify something, or if they're even accused of submitting false information, all bets are off. This is at the top of page 20 in HR 4174. It says information collected by an agency under a pledge of confidentiality may be provided to law enforcement agency for the prosecution of submissions. So they will be turning the aggregate data into personally identifiable data if they suspect that you could be lying. So who's to say that they could just falsely accuse you of lying, and then just to get your PII and turn it over. I mean, this is wide open for abuse. It's a joke when they say that it's got privacy protections. I just can't say enough about how much he needs to veto this bill.
Goodness, Christal. As you explained all of that, media, probably more than any citizen, is angry at Facebook for doing all of those very things, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, this almost sounds like it was modeled after all of the abuses of our privacy, with authority, without authority, knowingly or unknowingly, selling our clicks, our likes, our, it's the same
you're
thing.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And in fact, this bill talks about public-private coordination and collaboration. So one of the things that the agents are required to do is to go and create bridges, or I can't remember the term, I can't find it quickly, but they want a bridge so that the private companies like Facebook or Microsoft or Google or whoever else will be also sharing data, because they're all buying into this faith-based belief that everyone in all these thousands of agencies are good, that nobody's going to abuse us for any reason, and that we should just share all the data, and that they'll make better decisions for us, for our lives, based on the data that they have, which is just so completely ridiculous. And I just kept thinking that if it was a true, sincere desire on the part of those passing this bill, if it was truly their desire to not have data shared that should never be shared, whether it's national security risk or whether it's just the liberty privacy principle that people shouldn't be bugged and stalked and watched and controlled by people knowing everything about them. Either way, if that is a sacred principle, privacy, if that is important, then they wouldn't have given the ability to so many agents to break this law, and such a slap on the hand if they do. So we're setting ourselves up for big trouble. And I realize it may be way too late to get the president to veto, and he may have vetoed it right now while we're talking. I mean, signed it into law while we're talking. But what I'm hoping is that all of our people who care about liberty, who probably voted to pass this thing, not realizing what it really was, if they will understand it, maybe they can take some steps in whatever sphere they work to try to dig their heels in and say, no, we are not going to be sharing this data. If there's any way that they can keep their policies, but especially state policies. This bill goes out of its way to say any statutes that stand in the way of research need to be worked around. They want these agents to work around the statutes and the policies. I'm assuming it's state privacy law they're talking about, that could stop them from gathering this data. And so the fact that they are openly working against privacy law makes it hard for me to believe that anyone there is swallowing, in all seriousness, the idea that they care about privacy.
Christal, I see like two lanes on this one. One is how it is truly challenging the Fourth Amendment. That's number one.
Yep.
And number two, I just wonder how many state legislatures and state laws, state constitutions, when you talked about the workaround, would not, once it becomes law, I guess, I don't know if you can challenge something before it's law. Maybe you can. But certainly after it becomes law, that, it becomes suspended until it goes through the court system.
Yeah. I think if we can just wake up all of our good guys in the states to say, look, what this really is a giant data vacuum. They've just connected all of us, if this goes through, all of us to this giant data vacuum. But, the good thing is we're all kind of muggles in our own way. And sometimes it takes a long time, just the inefficiency of humanity and people not getting along and people not getting the memo. I think it's not going to be easy for them to actually implement this thing, which is why the bill is called Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking. They have much more to come, and they realize that if they're really going to create kind of a China-style big government data,
which they haven't already done with Obamacare, because all the agencies get to share that data. This is like the data that Obamacare didn't sweep up, right? So, I mean, they have everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because the schools, see, about 9 years ago, the schools, every state was given millions of federal grant money to build SLDS systems, which is called State Longitudinal Database System. And it's just a database system that follows the child throughout the child's career. And every state has one of these. But what the grant condition was to get all these millions was you had to make it interoperable with all the other systems. And I remember when this happened thinking, this is so obvious that they're trying to build a federal system.
Yeah, I remember that one very well.
Conspiracy theorists, you're silly. Why are you so interesting? Well, now it's in our laps. Now they're literally using all the SLDS systems with this bill to connect all that. So all those students and all those teachers and everybody who is even family, because a lot of the information that is in a student database has to do with their family.
Correct.
Even like in the case of IEPs, I don't know if they have special privacy. I hope they do. But they have all kinds of even medical data that's in there. So this is even just the school alone would be enough to do, I think, citizen surveillance in a powerful way. But when you combine that with census data, Social Security data, forestry data, Department of Agriculture data, every single federal agency and all their instrumentalities. So it's all these regional planning commissions. Anybody that's even instrumental in serving the federal government in any way is going to be mandated to do it. Plus, they're going to ask all the other people to do it because they're trying to build these bridges with private enterprise and all the state agencies. And I just think this is something that we need to really sound the alarm, let people know that this is a powerful agenda. It has nothing to do with helping privacy, and we need to do what we can to stop it. I think there are a lot of people who simply don't understand what's going on. They think, well, data's good, isn't it? Well, data is good, but it can be used for good or ill.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we don't give away our privacy in the process of wanting to have better research.
Christal, if all this collection is happening and we have these massive databases, God knows where it's ever even going to be stored, we don't even know how that data is protected, number one, against, outside rogue hacking entities.
Yeah.
But given what you've just said, we don't even need the census then, do we?
Well, it's interesting. Years from now, I think there's going to be a lot fewer needs. I think they're going to have, at least for data collecting, they're employing all of these agencies that are already in place and turning them all into data collectors. Every single agency, whether it's the military or the agriculture or the schools, everyone's being used to be a data miner. But years from now, I don't know, maybe they really will have this one central place that collects it all. Who knows? But they're definitely setting it up by all the interoperability laws, and they even have a mandate in there that you need to try to convert all of your non-machine readable data so that machines can read it. So if there's some little school somewhere that keeps things on, paper files, they're being told that they need to make it all machine readable so it can all be swept up.
In all of your reading of these, I can. In all of your reading, did you see any place where there were carve-outs or exemptions?
Well, like I said,
except for the energy,
the energy people got an exception. That's the only one I see. One that actually made me laugh because of how ridiculous it was. It's on page 24 of HR 4174. It says that whenever a written agreement about data that respondents were required by law to report, by this law to report, and the respondents were not informed the data could be shared for, they're talking about if you didn't know that it could be shared, right? Then it says the agency shall allow a minimum of 60 days for public comment in a public notice. So basically, they're replacing informed consent with informed public comment, which we all know is a joke. Public comment is the biggest joke in the world. They can receive thousands of angry commenters or concerned commenters, which the CEP did, by the way, and they ignored it all. But they don't have to do anything about it, and they don't do anything about it. They just sit on and say, okay, we check that box, we got public comment done, and that's why this makes me so angry. So if somebody were to say, no, you can't share my data, I was required by law to provide that data, and no, I don't want it shared, so what? There's absolutely no enforcement mechanism. It's all just a bunch of words. And the same thing goes with these pledges of confidentiality. There are a lot of mentions of pledges of confidentiality in this bill, but they can break that. Like one example I mentioned earlier was if they find out that somebody was submitting false data, or even if they weren't, if they're accusing someone of submitting false data, then suddenly the pledge of confidentiality means nothing and they share everything anyway with law enforcement. So those pledges of confidentiality are just ridiculous. They are just ridiculous.
Yeah,
So
I'm looking
anyway,
at the summary that's on the Congress.gov website. The last two sentences of the summary of this bill says, Confidential Information Protection and Statistical Efficiency Act of 2017. Whatever that means. That's just a statement.
Yeah.
And then the last one says, this bill codifies provisions relating to confidential information protection and statistical efficiency. What? What?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I actually studied over and over and over again page 17 of this bill because that's where a lot of the definitions are. And that's where I started understanding that they really are trying to talk out of both sides of their mouth, because they identify non-statistical purpose as PII, personally identifiable information. Basically, they don't use that word, I do. It says data in identifiable form, used for law enforcement. So it's got under a pledge of confidentiality, but it's used for law enforcement. So basically, I'm assuming, it's not in the bill, but I'm assuming that they mean that is wrong and bad, that you shouldn't be sharing PII that was gathered for a non-statistical purpose, right? But then when they define statistical purpose, they say it's getting data without identifying individuals in the studied groups. So they're saying, we're just studying all the third graders at this school, but we're not going to say which student it was. But we all know that if they take that information plus how many third graders happen to be black, and then how many third graders happen to live on this street, and pretty soon it's very easy for them to identify exactly which third grader they were talking about. But not only that, when they define statistical purpose separately from statistical activities, then I get suspicious. And sure enough, statistical activities is basically collecting PII again. It's basically the same thing as non-statistical, because here, I'll read you this little part. It says, statistical activities means the collection, compilation, processing, or analysis of data for the purpose of describing or making estimates concerning the whole, that's big, or relevant groups, that's medium, or components, that's tiny. That could be as small as one person within the economy, society, or the natural environment. So I say, wait a minute, economy, society, or natural environment, that covers everything. That's money, people, and land. What else is there to data mine besides those things? And if they take it down as small as groups or components within, then I don't see how they can even call that statistical. That looks to me like personally identifiable, or at least tiny little groups. So I feel like when they say statistical, they just mean anything. It's literally anything at all could be a statistical activity. It's just a joke. It's just a word that people tend to respect because nobody had an easy time passing statistics.
Yeah, the gumption to go look it up. Yeah.
Exactly. But
so this went through two committees. This went through the House Oversight Government Reform Committee, and on the Senate side, it went through Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. And it was presented to the White House day before yesterday.
Well, interesting. Back, I guess it was about less than a year ago, I actually called Trey Gowdy's office asking about this bill. This was, before it was really going through anywhere. But I knew that Trey Gowdy was for it, and I was confused because I see him as a patriot, and I don't see this bill as patriotic at all. And so I just wanted to know why. Why are you for this bill? And I talked to one of his staffers, and she said to me, well, we're very concerned about the veterans and the treatment of the veterans, and they're having terrible treatment, and because there's bad accountability, things never get better. So the way they're selling this to people like Trey Gowdy is, we are going to make people within the federal government accountable, and that's how they're selling it, which is a fantastic idea. But you have to do that very carefully and without. This bill, it needs to be gutted and written by people who understand privacy, people who have carefully read the definitions, and people who know that privacy and data research are sometimes at odds, and sometimes you have to err on the side of privacy, even if it means you're going to have some departments that stay corrupt until somebody cleans them up in some other way, than data mining them to force them to be to try to get them to do better. So I see why these people are voting for this bill, but I don't think they fully understand. I really don't believe their staffers or whoever read the bill for them really read it the way I did. I mean, I really read this with a fine-tooth comb, and there's so many notes on every page, and I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I just don't believe that these congressmen have done that. I don't think they know what they voted for.
Well, it doesn't appear so, where they concentrated on the benefits of one agency like the VA and, all the other agencies they certainly didn't really care about. And so the best thing that we can do is to call our representatives, call our senators, and then I would say get into a tweet up and start tweeting the White House and say, President Trump, you have to veto this thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can't call. At least I'm wasn't able to, and I've been trying because of the government shutdown. If you call D.C., everything is shut down.
We can call their home office.
Yeah, call the home office. My representatives, their mailboxes were full, so I've been trying to email directly, or I've been mostly on Twitter. I've just mostly been on Twitter because I honestly don't know how to get through. I was thinking maybe I should just make a little video and YouTube it and try to send that to Donald Trump, because I don't know how to get his attention. I mean, everyone wants the president's attention, but we need his attention. We need him to know that this is bad news, and it's going to have long-lasting effects if we let this bill slide through, and it has already slid through 99%.
It has.
But even
it has. It just needs a signature.
But I don't want people to lose hope, because even if he signs it, it's a foundational bill.
It can still be challenged in court. It can go all the way to the Supreme Court if we do it right.
Absolutely.
Well,
and educating people is the key. It really is. The people need to know what's going on so they can hold people accountable.
Miss April, Christal Swasey,
okay.
Thank you. I talk to April a lot. Thank you, Christal, for explaining this and taking the time and doing all the legwork. You did the hard work. So now it's up to us to kind of grab the baton from you and run with it. So hat tip to you for doing this, and in a big, huge way. Happy New Year. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and we'll see you again very soon.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.